Good evening, everyone. It is Monday night, and Monday nights in May are for marriages. We are so glad that you've been joining us, and we truly hope that you have been finding these sessions helpful, not just for your communication, but also to build a healthier marriage. And I'm really proud of those of you that have been watching each week, for you are taking seriously how valuable our marriages are and wanting to improve them. And I really appreciate that, because as you improve your marriage, you improve the community of our church. And as we improve the community of our church, we improve our community as a whole. And so we are thankful that you are being a part of these. And I hope, like I said, that you're finding them very useful. I think the material that Doctors Les and Leslie Parrott have put together is very good. It's excellent. If we will do the exercises and learn about ourselves and our spouse, and then put it into practice, I think it will be very valuable. And I think today's session is going to be extremely important as we continue to talk about how do we have this love talk that is most beneficial for our marriages. Hopefully you've already watched video 4 on Right Now Media. If you haven't, you can watch it afterwards if you'd like to, or you can always stop this recording and you can go back and you can watch that. Also, hopefully you've printed off the study guide that we'll be going through today that is on our website, rchog.org. So let's get right into it tonight. During last week's session, we talked about the head-heart connection, the need to pair both facts and feelings so that you can empathize with your spouse. You see, empathy is that ability to walk in someone else's shoes. So you are better able to both understand where they are coming from when you communicate, and of equal importance, how to respond in love. Tonight we're going to discuss a critical aspect of communicating and empathy. It's the art of listening. And I call it an art because it may be the most valuable skill in building healthy communications in your relationships. And since art involves skill, listening can be a skill that's learned and improved. And I don't think a lot of times we ever are taught how to listen. And so tonight, that's what we're going to be really focusing on, is how do you listen well? What goes into being a good listener? Because listening is a very important part of empathy. If you aren't willing to listen, you're certainly never going to empathize with your partner, and you're never really going to know where they're coming from and have good communication. So we're going to be looking at chapters 12 and 13, and chapter 12 is titled Listening with the Third Ear, which is kind of an interesting way to look at it. The way I look at that title is that third ear is your empathy. It's your heart. You have 2 ears to hear with, but you're not just listening with your ears, you're also listening with your heart, wanting to find out the feelings that are beneath the surface of the words that are being used to communicate. And I know sometimes that is difficult, especially I think between men and women. Women often, when they say something, there is a feeling behind the words. For guys, we just usually mean what we say. And so we have to understand that about each other. We have to be empathetic of that. And listening has its own special abilities and skills that we're going to talk about. So let's get started with the first question, honey. Would you consider yourself a better listener or a better talker? And why is that?
I'm probably a better talker. I talk quite a bit. And I'm used to talking all day at school, so I'm used to doing that, to talking, to explain things, to make sure people understand. So I know that I'm constantly checking for understanding with you, and sometimes that drives you crazy. So I think I'm better at talking.
Okay. I think most of us are. I mean, there's just something about it. Unless you maybe had a parent that was a really good listener. But I think even if you did have a parent that was a really good listener, I'm not so sure we understood what they were really doing there. I think listening is a skill that has to be kind of discovered and developed by each person individually. And so for some reason, I think talking just comes more naturally to most people. Not all, but most people, I think, would have to be honest and say that we're better talkers than we are listeners. Okay, next says, most people believe themselves to be a good listener. The research, and let's be honest, our personal experiences suggest otherwise. They've actually done research on that and asked people ahead of time, do you think you're a good listener? And they found that most people say, yeah, yeah, I'm a good listener. But then when they actually put them through some activities to find out whether they really are a good listener or not, the research shows that we're really not. So what do you think hinders our ability to be a good listener?
I think sometimes it's the difference between the speed with which we process and the speed with which we speak.
Okay.
And I think we're racing ahead to how we're going to respond, or we're reacting ourselves so quickly to what's being said because we can process, 2 or 3 steps down the road while somebody's saying something, that we get almost impatient sometimes, and we don't actually stop and listen to what is being said. Instead, I know I have a tendency to jump to conclusions. Oh, this is where he's going or she's going or whatever, and I jump then to my response, and then their response, and then my response to that, all before they're even done telling me what it is that they wanted to tell me.
Yeah. You've probably heard this before, and I think the book points this out, that the average person talks at about 100 to 125 words per minute, and our minds can process at least twice that fast. That our minds can process 250 plus words per minute. And so the unfortunate reality of usually what's going on in most conversations is the person is talking to us and we're hearing it, but really what's going on in our mind, more than listening to what they're saying, is we're already formulating and talking to ourselves about what they're saying. We can kind of hear what they're saying, but we are, like you said, we're processing other things and how we might solve whatever they're talking about, or how we're going to respond, or I think in some cases just thinking about something completely different. Because again, our minds can process faster than somebody can speak. And so there's, a pretty large degree of distraction that can happen during that time. And so I think that's the first key that we have to understand about being a good listener. Is you have to realize that that's just the capacity of our minds to be able to do that. And so we have to intentionally slow our own minds down, keep ourselves from jumping to conclusions or thinking about something or somebody else while the person is talking, so that we can truly just focus in. Again, here's another big key, and this goes back to really our first lesson on the basics of communication. Communication 101 is that we should be willing and able to reflect feelings. Well, to reflect feelings mean I have to listen beyond what the words actually are to what the person is actually meaning and feeling. And to do that, boy, you can't be distracted. You have to be able to really be listening and thinking about nothing other than, okay, let me try to get inside this person's head, in their shoes. Let me walk with them for a minute while they're telling me this and see if I can really figure out what's really most important and how I can validate and value this person during this conversation. That's huge to be able to do that. And it's a skill. It is truly something that we can learn if we practice. And so exercise 13, I think, helps us to begin listening for the message underneath the words. And so exercise 13 is actually very simple. It just gives some statements and asks you to write a little sentence in response to the statement in an attempt to reflect feeling, to find out what's really going on below the surface. And so the first one just says, I don't want your advice. Okay. Well, at face value, that sounds pretty straightforward. But let's be honest. There's something going on there. If I don't want your advice, something's happened in the past or something's happening in my life right now that is making me feel a certain way that caused me to say those words. And so we have to understand that. The second one says, Wendy used to email or phone me, but I haven't heard from her in ages. Honey, what would you kind of assign a feeling to what's going on in that statement? Wendy used to email or phone me, but I haven't heard from her in ages.
Maybe almost a hurt response, like, I wonder what's going on. I think it's so normal for us to stop and think, wow, you know what? Wendy used to contact me frequently. Okay, but what have I done? Have I contacted them? I think sometimes we tend to jump to conclusions, and maybe that's not what's going on here. But I think sometimes we don't necessarily see our own part also. But I think it's a hurt. They're hurt that, so there's a feeling, the underlying feeling, I think, is just hurt.
Yep.
They are hurt.
I think you're right. The third one says, you need to call me if you're running late so I know what's going on. That's an interesting one, because there could be several things going on there. There could have been a lack of trust in the relationship. And so therefore, the need for a phone call is to soothe my worries that something wrong or bad is going on. There could also be emotions of control. You know, I want you to call because I want to be in control of the situation. So there's lots of underlying emotions and feelings that are actually being communicated if we take just a few moments to look beneath the surface. The fourth one says, I'm not sure what to do about my manager at work. He's so unreasonable with his deadlines. Again, what's the underlying feeling there? What would you think, honey?
I think maybe overwhelmed.
Okay.
Maybe the workload is too much for whatever reason. Maybe there are other things going on that are keeping you from being able to do your work in the time that you would normally be able to do it.
Yeah.
Maybe it really is unreasonable expectations, but it sounds like overwhelmed or frustrated.
Yeah. The last question asks, there is no way I'm going to let my mother spoil this party by rearranging the seats at the table this year. Hello. Now, there's I think, a statement that we would tend to maybe want to jump in and solve the problem, when really there's something much deeper going on that we need to take the time to empathize with and maybe be open to listening some more, or just asking some guiding questions to bring out what's really going on there, because certainly there's something that's happened in the past that's making that person say that. So I hope what you're seeing through exercise 13 is the words that we use that sound like they say a particular thing, they probably mean something different when you're willing to go beneath the surface and just take a moment to analyze the feelings or the emotions that are causing those words to be said. That's really, really important, and it's a great skill to learn and to be a better listener. Okay, Doctors Les and Leslie say listening is to validate, care, acknowledge, and appreciate. It is so much more important than just hearing words in a conversation. So what skills are necessary to become a great listener? Honey, what would you say just a couple, 3 skills of being a great listener would be?
Well, you kind of have to really be interested in what the other person, not even necessarily what the other person is saying, but you have to care about the other person. You have to be a caring person.
Yeah.
You have to be willing to give the time.
Yeah.
If you're going to be a good listener, then you have to set aside your own selfish needs and desires on a variety of levels. And sometimes it's just simply taking the time to slow down and actually really listen to what's being said. So I think time, you need to be willing to give the time. You need to be willing to be caring enough about the other person and care enough about the other person to slow down enough your own agenda and be willing to listen.
Yeah. When I think about the skills of being a good listener, I think about some of the things that we've actually already talked about in some of our sessions. Eye contact. You don't have to say a thing. But keeping some eye contact with the person while you're listening helps them know that you're engaged, that you're validating what they're saying. I think one of the other suggestions was leaning in, kind of having a body posture of leaning in as opposed to crossing your arms or leaning away, which tells the person that you may be not overly interested. So those are skills. Those are actual skills that if you stop and think about, that you can start practicing in your conversations with people and watch the difference it makes. Another skill is, again, just reflecting feelings. Just being willing to take the time to, like we said before, slow your brain down to where you can be thinking about, well, what's really being said here? What's the emotion behind it? That's a skill that exercise 13 can help you work on and you can get better at. Okay, let's now take a look at exercise 14 because it deals with one of the skills of being a good listener. I just mentioned it, body language. I talked about eyes, eye contact, leaning in. And then this exercise, reading your partner's body language, goes into more accurately figuring out if you understand the positive and negative aspects of body language that either help or hinder our communication. It asks questions like, do you know that there are certain days of the week that are best to approach your partner with a new idea or a favor to ask? Wow. Do you know that? Are you aware that there are probably better times during the day? That's something important to consider. Have you had run-ins or difficulties getting along with your partner over the same issues again and again because you just don't understand? Okay. But their body language probably helped you understand that they're just not interested. At a dinner party with several people, have you ever thought you would get the attention of your partner by doing or saying something she would like, but then you discover that she barely noticed? Okay. These are just ways for you to consider if you're picking up on those nonverbal cues, the look. We probably all know the look, but there's much more than just the look that helps us tell what somebody is feeling or what they're wanting to say in different situations. And so this exercise is just to make us aware of all of those nonverbal communication cues that really help a lot in developing our relationships. The next one says, when you are having problems with a friend or a colleague at work and you talk to your partner about it, do you already know the kind of response she will give you? Maybe, maybe not. And the exercise just goes on. When your partner retreats to a part of the house without telling you what she's up to, do you know when to let her unwind alone and when to ask questions? Well, there's a good one. You might ask yourself that. Do you know? When you are enjoying a romantic moment with sweet kisses, are you able to quickly tell if she has something more in mind than just kissing? Hello. Yeah. When you ask your partner if she likes what you are wearing and she says she does, are you ever surprised to learn later that she really doesn't like it but didn't want to hurt your feelings? Well, there's a big one, right? There are things that we say or don't say all the time that may not be the truth, but it's an attempt to not hurt feelings. But then later, it can be a hurtful experience, because we weren't willing to be honest. Let's see here. When your partner asks for advice on something that's troubling her, are you quick to give her several suggestions to make the situation better? That's actually what we're going to talk about next, is offering advice. And oftentimes we offer advice that's unwanted, or maybe it's at the wrong time, as one of those exercise questions was talking about. Do we know the right time to communicate with our spouse, especially about something that's important, or it's something we need to talk about, that we need to come to a conclusion? Do we know the right time to do that? And being able to read body language and those nonverbal cues is really important. And so why don't we go ahead, and I hope that you'll take the time to do these exercises, because actually exercise 14 here has kind of a score that you go through on each of these questions, and then basically yields a total in which they say if you get over 24 points, then you're probably good at picking up on the nonverbal body language cues. If you're less than 24 points, then maybe you need to pay a little bit better attention to that. Honey, how do you feel you are when it comes to nonverbal body posture cues? Is that something that you cue into or not?
I think it kind of depends, just because I think so many times we're both so very busy that it's hard sometimes to pick up on those. But I think when I do, I'm hypersensitive to them, meaning I may assume something that isn't true based on what I think your body language or facial expressions are saying. Right. Because of my high need for approval, I think I tend to maybe overreact to what I think you may be thinking or feeling based on my assumptions. Yeah.
Well, and unfortunately, since my fear factor is the loss of time, I'm sure there's lots of conversations that we have in which my body language is not showing that I'm interested, because I've got a deadline or something that I feel needs to get done. And so I don't slow down. I'm distracted by that fear of the loss of time, in other words, and keeps me from making sure, that I'm engaged in the conversation. So
Well, but if I know that me knowing that now actually is a tool that I can use to step back and go, okay, wait a minute, Susie, just relax. He's not upset. He's just got some stuff that he's got to get done. Pick a better time.
Well, and I really hope that that's what you're finding in all of this material, is that it's actually just revealing different parts of your personality, just kind of the way you operate, so that your spouse can begin to realize that, just like Sue's now understands that about me. I understand that about her, and it helps us then be able to not only engage in conversation better, but probably more so continue conversation in healthier ways, as opposed to getting frustrated and just deciding not to communicate because we haven't understood the underlying reasons for why this conversation isn't going the way that I would expect or that I would want it to go. Okay, well, the chapter 13 has an interesting title, When Not to Talk, and it's an interesting title in a book about communication, but it is important, and so because it has a lot to do with listening and the skill of listening, because there are certain times that the skill of listening requires us to be quiet and to not offer advice. And so, are you surprised that a chapter in a book about communication is titled When Not to Talk? Do you agree that at times this is the best thing to do?
Yes. And it's probably one thing that I really need to keep in mind, because my mind does race. I have a lot to do, so I'm trying to get to the finish line, and I tend to finish your sentences and assume what it is that you're thinking and what you're going to say when I don't even give you the time to actually finish what it is that you're going to say, because I'm moving on to the next thing.
Right.
And so I think there's definitely, that's just one example, but I think, yes, the art of silence, again, is an art and needs to be learned and practiced at appropriate times.
Okay. Well, exercise 16 kind of helps us try and determine situations where we probably ought to, as it says, clam up. Do you know when to clam up? And then it just gives some scenarios, and then it gives some multiple choice answers. And so, for instance, the first one says, your partner is dying to delve into what you are thinking about, a potential job change. You aren't quite ready to talk about it because you know it's going to be intense. What do you do? A, talk about it anyway. Say, honestly, I don't know when I'll ever be ready to get into that conversation with you. Or C, say, I need some time to think about this, but I will be ready to talk after dinner tonight. So kind of just giving us some options of ways in which maybe one of the other in the marriage wants to talk about something, but the other just isn't really ready to talk about it. I think what I like about that scenario and the suggestions is you're basically letting each other know, yes, I know that we need to talk about this, and we will later, but I just can't right now. Because the answer that they suggest is C, I need some more time to think about this, but I will be ready to talk after dinner tonight. So that's telling your spouse, I'm okay about communicating with this. I'm not blowing you off, because I think that's what unfortunately is the message received when we're not ready to talk about something yet. When we still have to think it through a little bit more, the message received is, I don't want to talk about it. And so oftentimes the other spouse thinks, well, okay, great. And then they don't and aren't willing to bring it up later because they don't want to start a fight or a conflict or whatever, when the reality is it is something that needs to be discussed. But there's certain times where we need to back off. And so that's not always easy to do. Let me jump ahead to the third scenario here in the exercises. You are trying to decide with your partner whether to attend a party that you know will be boring, but will likely be an opportunity to network with people who can open up some doors for you. You're exhausted and don't want to go. Suddenly your partner goes into a tirade and gets overly emotional, even irrational, saying that you are lazy and that it would be unthinkable not to attend. You are most likely to A, come back with equal emotion about how unthinkable it is for her to put this kind of pressure on you. B, say, do you have any idea how ridiculous you sound right now? Or C, say, I'm going to give you some space for a few minutes and then we can talk after you pull it together. Honey, what would you recommend happen in this scenario?
Well, I think C is pretty clear, the one that we should do. I don't know that it's always our first reaction.
Yeah.
And but yeah, it's important to recognize in ourselves when we need space. That's what I see the difference between those two scenarios is that the first one, recognize in yourself when you need more time, you're not ready to discuss, and being able to verbalize that. And then also recognize when, hey, maybe this isn't one of their finest moments. I'm going to back away before this and give a little time, but say that and not just do it. That's, I think, what I took the most out of this exercise is giving me just some ideas that I hadn't really thought about how to say that without coming across like you're either cutting the conversation completely off or cutting the person off. In this situation, I could see if you just walked away or whatever, that it could be felt very personal in terms of pushing the person away.
Yeah. Well, I even struggled a little bit. I even think C ought to be less words. I think you could just say, I'm going to give you some space for a few minutes. Because the second part is said, and then we can talk after you pull it together. I'm pretty sure if I told you, I'm going to give you some space and let you have a chance to pull it together,
it might not go so well.
No,
I even think that you could say, I'm going to give us some space so that there's no finger pointing, because that's pretty direct that the person saying that feels that it's the other person's issue.
Yes.
And that may very well be the case. But I think if you're willing to say, you know what, I think I'm going to give us some space to kind of calm down about this, and then we'll revisit it in a few minutes. Takes the finger pointing away from it. But you're right. The last part of that sentence option is very targeted, and I don't think would come across real helpful in this situation.
No. So the idea here is to just really consider that there are times that the old adage, less is more, is helpful in communication. That the fewer words you speak, or maybe not at all, or at least giving the relationship chance to cool down or whatever before you do speak those words, is maybe the most valuable thing you can do in your communication to move it forward. The next question on our handout says, why do you think one of our first reactions to problems is to offer advice?
I don't know, but I'm very much that way. I think it's because I really do have a heart to want to help people, and so I want to help them out of their conflict. I really don't like conflict, or if somebody has a problem, I actually really like to try to come up with different ways that I could help solve the situation, and that's not always what somebody wants.
Right.
But I think a lot of times it can be driven by different things. For some people, it could be you just want to get the conversation over. Let's just solve the problem and move on to something else. And I think sometimes people just really want to help, and therefore they try to come up with solutions maybe before the other person is really ready for that.
Yeah. Well, and I think this is going to sound so simple, but oftentimes skills in communication are. I remember I had a young man in our church, a great young man. We were out golfing one day. And I'm a horrible golfer. He's an excellent golfer. And I bet you that we had, already golfed 4, 5, 6 holes. And, I was playing normally, which was not very well. He was playing normally, pretty darn good. And we got to a place where he could see I was getting frustrated with my swing. But before he even offered his advice, he just simply asked me, would you like my advice? Wow, well, that's rocket science, isn't it? To ask another person first before offering your advice, would you like my advice? And in that situation, I'd actually been waiting for his advice for a long time, but I hadn't even asked for it. But he knew enough to just maturely say, would you like my advice? And I said yes. He offered his advice, and it was great advice. And so I think that just alone, instead of being quick to offer, ask first, because then it gives you the opportunity to say, well, no, I just need to be listened to, or whatever it happens to be. Or you can turn the conversation to maybe more of the feeling that's going on. Because usually we always start with the what before we get to the why. And we get stuck wanting to solve the what before we know what the why is. And so that's why it's important sometimes just to listen and not offer our advice until it's time. The next question says, what kind of processor are you? What does it look like for you to give your spouse space to process? So I think it's referring to, are you a processor that you need to talk it out, or other people need to kind of have some space to think it out? What do you think you are, honey?
I'm a talk it out kind of a person.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, that's how I need to talk it out. I think I said that to you just last night. I know you're busy. I just need to talk this out, so I'll wait till you're busy or till you're not busy, because I need to I'm recognizing that I don't necessarily need somebody to solve it for me. I just need somebody to listen to me talk it out, or I look pretty silly just talking to myself talk it out. But I think I talk it through. Yeah.
Okay. And I think, you have to learn what each of you are. Are you a think it out or a talk it out? And then if a think it out is married to a talk it out, which almost 100% of the times it probably is that way, then the talk it out needs to be patient at times and let the think it out person have that space to be able to prepare for the conversation. But again, I thought that exercise gave a great suggestion. At least give enough information that your spouse knows, I'm not blowing you off, I just need some more time to think this out. Or maybe vice versa. We can say at the outset of a conversation, hey, I just need to talk this out. Not expecting a solution or any advice, I just need to talk this out. I know it sounds so simple, but maybe if we would just, preface our conversations or some time, some space to process with just a simple little statement of the obvious, it would really help the other person know we're not blowing them off. Mm-hmm. You're still important to me. You're still valuable. This has nothing to do with you at the moment. It's just what I need. Mm-hmm. I need to talk it out, or I need a time.
I think it's important that we have to be self-aware enough to know which way we do it. I think we are just, especially if you've been married for a while, you're just used to the pattern and the rhythm of communication that you've developed over time. Mm-hmm. And I think we aren't always aware that we need time. Or I'm just realizing recently that I think things through out loud. Yeah. And so I think it is so important. This not only helps us to understand our spouse better, but it also helps us to understand ourselves so that we can communicate what we need. Yeah.
Now, the Bible has actually an awful lot to say about listening and how we communicate. And one of those passages is found in James 1:19 through 20. And it says, understand this, my dear brothers and sisters. You must all be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to get angry. Human anger does not produce the righteousness God desires. Now, which of the three areas mentioned in this verse, quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to get angry, would you say is the most difficult for you, and why do you think it's hard?
I think it's the slow to speak, and I think I've kind of already talked about that aspect, that I'm just, whether it's I'm busy and I'm geared up, or it's just the way that I do have a problem-solving nature, so the minute I sense a conflict, I'm trying to say, well, we could go about it this way, or you could go about it that way, to find different solutions. And so I think I just have to kind of sometimes slow my roll and slow down a little bit.
Okay. I think I'm finding in myself that, and I'm having to check that. I think I used to be really, really quick to listen. But for some reason, especially in my pastoral ministry, I've now lived long enough and have met with enough people and listened to enough people that now at times I think I jump to the conclusion, I know where this is going. And I have a story, or I have an example, or I have a piece of advice that I begin to interject too soon, where I never used to do that. And it's just simply because of, my age, getting older and having more experiences and thinking I know, here's what'll help. Mm-hmm. And I need to slow that down and be more willing to listen, even if it does wind up being a very similar scenario to what I've dealt with 10 other times. It wasn't that person that I dealt with 10 other times. And I need to be willing to listen to them. So what I find most interesting about this passage is the connection that James makes between being quick quick to listen and slow to speak. I mean, he could have just said those two things. He could have just said that and it would have been good advice. But he says, and slow to get angry, which tells me that oftentimes we find ourselves in moments of anger because we weren't quick to listen. We were quick to speak, and it just caused a situation, a circumstance that caused anger, when if we'd have just been willing to listen at first, everything would have been much better. The next question says, what does it look like to be quick to listen to your spouse? In other words, what listening skills would your spouse appreciate the most? It's an interesting question. What do you think?
I think it would be for me, again, to slow my response, let you finish, give you just even the opportunity to finish what you're saying, instead of, squealing in with my understanding of what the end of that sentence is going to be, or the end of that thought. I should just let you finish.
Okay. I think I clearly know mine, and it's because of my fear of the loss of time or inefficiency, that the skill that I need to work on better is not being distracted, not allowing that fear to distract me when we're having a conversation, so that you know that I'm engaged, that you know that I value what we're talking about, that I value you, and that I acknowledge and care about you more than the particular conversation we're having. And really, that's what this love talk is all about, is making sure that your loved ones, whether it be your spouse or your kids or your friends or whoever, knows that yes, you may be communicating about a particular topic at the moment, and it may be a pretty serious one. It may be one that's kind of got some conflict in it, and there needs to be a resolution. And so it's a conversation that needs to have a conclusion, but yet more importantly than whatever the topic happens to be at the moment is, if our goal could be to leave conversations at least as often as we could, making sure that the other person knew that we cared about them, that they were more important to me than the topic of conversation, then you can't lose. The relationship is always going to grow. It's always going to be built when that is the goal of our communication. And I think listening is huge. Listening is a skill that can help do that. And so just for you, asking to consider this week, what's your advice quotient? In other words, do you tend to give more of it than you should? And how do you like receiving advice from your partner? What are the times you like it and when don't you like it? And think that through. Be specific. And then this week, read chapters 12 and 13. Do exercises 13 through 17. And most importantly, talk with your spouse about the results and those aha moments that you have. Because I think when you're faithful to read the material and do those exercises, you will have some pretty powerful aha moments. And then finally, look for ways this week to hold back your words and practice the skills of listening. I really hope that this session has been incredibly valuable in your relationships and building your communication skills, because the biblical mandates on this are clear, that we need to be slow to speak, we need to be quick to listen, and therefore we will be slow to get angry, and our relationships will benefit for it. Thank you so much for joining us again this week. We've got one more session next Monday, and we hope you will have a great week and join us next time. God bless you.